Hello, my name is Sydney Borrego, and this is my multi-genre project. My project revolves around the question, why do animals in shelters and labs deserve more humane rights? I believe that animals, when they enter a lab or even a shelter or just the wrong hands, are stripped of their rights, because they are not prioritized or thought of as people. And I believe, at the least, they should have some simple rights. This is a list that I made of their basic rights they should have. Number 1. No cosmetic testing on animals. This can include makeup, lotion, soap, and any other cosmetic you can think of. Stricter animal cruelty laws. Many animal abusers never get caught because it is not a huge priority to police and other government. The penalty, most of the times, is just a fine or in extreme cases here in Colorado, a small jail sentence. Number 3. Non-torturing killings of animals. This can include less cruel putting down of animals in shelters or stop cruel ways of torturing animals for resources. This can include tearing off an animal's fur while it is still living. Last, more government funding for shelters and rescues to help these animals live a better life or have a second chance. These are just a few basic needs of our pets and animals in the US and around the world. Now that my basic points are out of the way, on to my main presentation. My presentation will follow a story of an animal rescuer named June to get my point across in one basic large story. June lives in Boston and is currently researching animal shelters. She was assigned a shelter here in Colorado. You may have heard of it. It's called the Dumb Friends League. I'll start by reading one of her works on a newspaper article called the Paw Street Journal. Meet Winter the Siberian Husky. Winter is a 5-year-old Siberian Husky from Boston, Massachusetts. She was entered into a local animal shelter. This shelter was the Animal Rescue League of Boston. Volunteers have found her on the streets of downtown Boston, weak and starving, with a clear collar and scar marks. Her previous owners were clearly neglectful and abusive towards her, and when she was rescued, the shelter was able to bring her back to good health, weight, and her scars began to fade. While we have not been able to find Winter's previous owners, we know she is in good hands after being received back at the animal rescue, and now lives with a wonderful, loving family that she has learned to love and trust. Although this still begs a question on what happened to Winter when she got in how did she get in such bad shape? When the shelter found her, they first noticed how underweight she was. This was most likely because of neglect. Her previous owners had not fed her enough this was most likely because of neglect. Her previous owners had not fed her enough because it was clear she had recently escaped the household. Also, she was visibly dirty, with dirt, grime, and even blood on her fur. This is still unclear if she had just recently gotten dirty or was previously dirty on her escape. Previous clues had led them to believe that she was dirty before she had escaped. They had noticed that she had visible scar marks on where her collar used to be. This was from a combination of both a very tight collar that was most likely used since she was a puppy, and Winter being tied to a pole, yanking on the collar trying to break free. We know this because the scar on her neck is much more indented on one side of her neck, a common mark of dogs being tied to poles, trees, building, etc. Last, we noticed visible claw marks across her face and chest. These seem to appear to be claw marks from a dog or cat. This was most likely from fights of stray dogs or cats. With this evidence, we were able to conclude that Winter was a neglected dog that had no food or shelter that eventually broke free. When I see stories like this, it pains me to remember that there are many more stray animals that have been in the same situation that may not have been able to get rescued like Winter was. We hope those reading can adopt a pet or volunteer just like the others have done with Winter. It saves so many lives. Eventually, June was assigned to study shelters in the US and was assigned Colorado, and she had to go through the process of getting to the shelter. She wrote to the shelter this letter. Dear Dumb Friends League Animal Shelter, my name is June Smith and I'm an animal researcher from the Animal Welfare Act Institute in Boston, Massachusetts. My department was assigned to research how animal shelters around the United States were to run. The state I was to study was, of course, Colorado. Your shelter is very well known and popular in Colorado, so I thought your shelter would be a perfect candidate to research. I want to be able to visit your shelter and get to know what it's like to work there. This can include one of your employees or volunteers, a demonstration of the process of taking a lost or abandoned animal, a demonstration on how to adopt these animals, an amount of animals you take in on a weekly basis, an average of how many animals you have to put down due to lack of space, and finally, how many materials these animals get on a monthly basis. I'm sure your shelter is very professional and a caring place, so I look forward to visiting and studying your shelter. I expect an amazing outcome. Sincerely, June from the Animal Welfare Act Institute. Eventually, the CEO of the Dumb Friends League got back to her with these text messages. Hello, is this June from the Animal Welfare Institute? Yes, you must be the CEO, John, right? Yes, I have received your letter requesting a visit and tour. Is Wednesday alright? Yes, Wednesday is fine. Will my questions listed in the letter be answered when I visit? Yes, the questions in your letter will be answered here, although do you have any other basic questions I can answer now that don't include numbers? No, but thank you. I will see you in your wonderful shelter Wednesday. On that Wednesday, she got to the shelter and was able to get a tour of the shelter and learn a lot of things about our shelter here in Colorado, and had a journal entry that she recorded her findings in. Here's one of her journal entries. Journal entry number 1, Dumb Friends League. Today was the day I had to tour the Dumb Friends League animal shelter. The employee that instructed me on the tour was very respectful and patient. A few things I learned were different about this shelter than other shelters like. There is no set time on how long an animal should stay, or no set time when it is put down. This shelter tries to find other places to shelter an animal or find a foster home. Another thing I had learned about this shelter, and many others in the area, for the animals that come in are from owners that can no longer take care of the animal properly. For example, they have become too old or unhealthy to take care of them anymore. This shelter also cares for large animals like horses. This differs from many other shelters, but it is a very inclusive way of taking in animals. Many people don't know. No, horses lose homes too, and need a shelter like the Dumb Friends League to care for them. Many of the kind volunteers help greatly in the shelter, not only with their work, but earlier today, a kind volunteer paid for 10 pets adoption fees. Last, they depend heavily on volunteer work and fundraising. While youth cannot volunteer, like other volunteers 16 and older, they can pay to learn to volunteer, which is a great volunteer and fundraising option for the shelter. My experience with the shelter was very pleasant, and I would say this shelter is very unique in the way they fundraise and care for the animals. But just like other shelters, could always use more funding and volunteers. Since some magazine writers in Colorado heard she was here in town, they had asked her to write a magazine article for the animal shelters in collaboration with some Colorado animal researchers to get an opinion, research, and experience from somewhere else in the U.S. to get more diversity in the article. Here's how it turned out. Animal shelters and rescues and their mission. Many shelters take in lost or abandoned animals and bring them back to health depending if they need it. In other times, if a dog or other lost animal is just lost, they will shelter the animal for a short amount of time if the animal is picked up. Many shelters put animals up for adoption for people to adopt and give the animal a home. This gives the animal a second chance at life if it were neglected or abused by its last owner. Although these shelters are non-profit and basically stay because of adoptions and donations, many of the times the shelters do not have enough profit to keep the shelter going, or not enough supplies to keep the animals alive or healthy. Animals have to be put down. Some animals have to be put down because they were not adopted in time to be saved, and others sheltered, and the shelter needs the space and time for other animals to be put in that space. How you can help with these shelters. First off, you could volunteer at your local shelter, donate money or supplies to your local shelter, report lost or missing animals to your shelter, adopt a pet from a shelter and treat them with love and care. Be sure to look where you are driving to make sure you don't hit a missing or lost animal. This happens quite often when animals are brought to shelter. June had a blog called June's Animal Research and Rescue Blog. On this blog, her and other animal rescuers add articles such as "Why Pets in Shelters Are Struggling and Need Help," with the caption of "Many shelters are struggling to keep these pets alive and receive little government payment to keep them going." And Pit Bulls, the Misunderstood Breed. Why these pit bulls are seen as harmful but are harmless, and why they deserve more rights instead of being excluded from other dogs. And June added an article about the Dumb Friends League and her experience, in which was called "Our Amazing Journey with the Dumb Friends League," and it discusses much of what she experienced and what made our shelter so unique and amazing, just like she mentioned in her journal entry, which is mainly the points she focused on. Another article on her blog, to give you a good idea of the diversity in her article, she wrote a quote-unquote recipe to stop neglect that's called "The Recipe to Loving and Caring for Your Animal," which gives a more creative way to get an important point across. The recipe goes like this. Recipe for loving and caring for your pet. Ingredients. 1. If the pet is small, a replacement collar every month is necessary. 2. Shelter when there is storms and heat waves. 3. Food and water. 4. A specific place for them to go to the restroom. 5. Appropriate cleaning and grooming tools. 6. Yearly pet visits. 7. Freedom for your pet or a specified place for your animal to be active and play. 8. A pet sitter when you are on vacation or at work. Combine all ingredients to have a healthy and happy pet that you can love and care for properly. Finally, to end this presentation, I have done a visual piece, a painting. This is a painting of a German Shepherd that has experienced two different situations. On the right, you have a German Shepherd that has been in an abusive situation or home, and on the left, you have a dog in a new home, a loving family, thanks to a loving shelter and the people in it. In conclusion, the way June explains and writes her journey, not only with our shelters, tells why these animals deserve more opportunities with better shelters and less testing, and how it can change an animal's life.